why we should be building InfoSec worker power through the labor movement. All the slides, resources, and citations for these are all on GitHub already. And so hopefully you're here for the talk about the labor movement, not the talk about databases, though I think there are a lot of good databases talks here this week. To get a sense of the room, how many people here have ever been in a labor union? Okay, 3, that's about what I expected. How many here would like to be in a union, if you could? Okay, awesome, that's about what I expected. Anyone who's just ambivalent or here to have something to listen to while sipping coffee? Okay, and anyone who's here to hack me, get me fired, or sabotage the labor movement? That's what I thought. They're all watching on camera. Hey, Elon. Okay, so for a bit of information about who I am and for some context setting, I'm going to talk a little fast, maybe get a little yelly. Hopefully I'll have time for one question at the end, but I assume that a lot of questions people are going to want to ask off camera, so there's resources, and I'll be hanging around after the talk. For a bit about me, so and why I'm arguably worth listening to. I'm not someone from big union to be an outside agitator and stir up trouble where I don't belong. Cybersecurity is my day job. I'm a senior cybersecurity specialist at a government agency. Exact one doesn't matter for the purposes of this talk, but in my day job, I'm a cloud engineer and product lead. Previously, I've worked on some privacy, incident response, and some other issues. Very importantly, the opinions and views expressed in this presentation are my own and my union locals and do not represent the thoughts, opinions, or positions of my current employer. This is a very important point. I'm here on my own dime, own time, and I'm not speaking for any other institution. As I'll get into a second, I am a union rep at my current job. Been doing that for about 5 years, representing some colleagues. And in my free time, I've built a Blinky badge, do some tool development, volunteered around the community at villages and other B-sides, and I got my master's degree in tech law and policy, which is relevant for some of the policy and law elements of this talk. I'm not a lawyer, this is not legal advice, but I did take some labor law, so I'm not speaking out of nowhere when it comes to some of these issues. Specifically on the labor background and why I'm worth listening to in that degree. So I've been a union rep for 5 years at my current job. My union local is with the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers, or IFPTE, because the labor movement likes convoluted acronyms just as much as the tech industry. I represent my IT and cybersecurity team in our day-to-day work, but have also done bargaining, dispute resolution, and advocacy, and I'm a tech policy advisor for IFPTE writ large. And then I also organize with some cool grassroots labor organizations, the Tech Workers Coalition and the Federal Unionist Network. All right. I think the most important thing about my background is that I am really just some guy. I'm not that special, despite what my mom may say. I have no black badges, no CVEs, no lead stories about getting domain admin or hacking nation states. If I can do the stuff covered in this presentation, you probably can too. This can be pretty daunting work, pretty intimidating work, and it's not work that can be practiced in a home lab or a CTF or something that you can get a cert for. No one really knows how to do it until they do it, and that means the only way for you to get good at it and to feel comfortable doing it is to do it. So I would like to start the talk, if I may, by offering some thoughts on the current moment, both broadly and specifically for us as a community and a workforce, compared to where we were a year ago. I'll then give some thoughts on what makes the hacker community particularly equipped to meet this moment and to organize our labor. After that, I'll talk about unions a bit more generally and how our community and industry could fit into the labor movement framework. And I'll conclude with some thoughts on why we really need to organize as workers right now with some concrete next steps. So, who remembers the plan? Specifically, the plan for how we, as hackers and InfoSec workers, were going to build and maintain political influence so that the feds don't go back to hunting us for sport, and we're going to maintain high demand for our labor so that we always had job security. If you don't remember, it's probably because there wasn't much of a plan, at least explicitly, beyond some vibes and the idea that we were kind of set as an industry and a workforce. To the extent that there was a plan to build and maintain political influence, especially among this community, a lot of it, I think, was dedicated to building Dark Tangent's Rolodex. That might be hyperbolic, but a lot of the work that was done to build this community's political influence came down to high-profile names, building individual relationships with policymakers and journalists, and then using those relationships to speak on behalf of the community without much formal accountability or direct input to or from this community, or much material input. Essentially, we've been doing policy advocacy more or less fueled by personal brands. Now, that's not to say that this is inherently bad, especially compared to where we were a decade or even longer ago. I'm not going to complain that the National Cyber Director came here every year to tell us how special we were and that we were needed and that they want to listen to us. But that type of individual-based advocacy is very fragile when it depends on a handful of people being listened to with their individual relationships. Now, as workers, we were able to coast on scarcity to create high demand for our labor. That demand may have been dramatically overestimated, overreported, and overinflated, but it kept our salaries high and our negotiating power strong. Essentially, we haven't really had to grapple with where our power comes from when it doesn't come from our individual relationships or our scarce skills. And we're still kind of stuck in that mindset. This slide I grabbed from Monday morning's keynote, which was a great keynote, and I loved it. And it was all about how we need to come together and build a community, and we're stronger together. And then this slide came up in the context of having a bad employer, and I was like, yes, Bryson, he's going to talk about voting to form a union when you have a bad employer. And then it was a metaphor for voting with your feet to leave your employer, and we were so close. So close to hitting the nail on the head, because you can literally vote in your workplace. You can literally democratically actually vote to have a union, as I'll touch on in some more later. So if we cut to where things are today, I'm going to say things aren't going great. I think that's kind of a consensus here, but this is pretty obvious in government, where a new administration has actively targeted leaders of our community for doing their jobs and doing them well. They've removed the voices in our community that were given federal government roles, like DT's advisory role at CISA. They've cut our peers' jobs or pushed them to leave, those peers who were doing deeply important work to protect public interest systems and provide free resources to the rest of us. They barely sustained the CVE data that serves as a foundation for our industry, and they removed oversight officials. And they removed oversight officials who stood to hold companies and other government agencies accountable for running insecure, immature cybersecurity and privacy programs. The totalitarians in government have been on a rampage, replacing competent professionals with yes men, and this isn't just dangerous for our republic, it's especially dangerous in our industry, where quickly and honestly reporting bad news is essential to keeping systems, data, and people safe. Not to worry, however. The push to quash our ability to dissent, raise alarms, and have protections on the job through union representation and collective bargaining has a carve-out for IT and cybersecurity workers. It specifically carves us out from those protections, allegedly for national security reasons. And just on Monday, a federal appeals court has affirmed that the president can essentially declare that any federal executive branch role is national security essential enough to be stripped of union protections, even if that position doesn't require a clearance or is as routine as checking drugs at the FDA. If anything demonstrates the criticality of our work, it's that we were explicitly excluded from layoff targets at the same time that we were excluded from union protections. They know that they need us and our labor to keep the machine running. They just don't want us to be able to say anything about it or do anything other than run the machine in the way that they say. The feds are back to hunting us for sport, and it's not for DMCA or CFAA violations this time, but it's because we could possibly slow them down. As for those of us who are in the private sector, our jobs may not be directly cut by the new administration, but certainly contracts and funding has gone away, and our bosses, more importantly, have felt emboldened to tighten the screws. Over the past few years, layoffs have been sweeping the tech industry, and we know the job market isn't what it was a few years ago. Our bosses have been fed the narrative that AI can successfully and competently take over our work, something that those of us who have spent more than a day being forced to shape our workflow around a new AI tool know isn't true, and they think they have free rein to cut without consequence. For the second year in a row, we should all be booing CrowdStrike. And this year, I think a lot more than last year, because this year, the harm of laying off hundreds of employees was an intentional choice made by George Kurtz, their CEO, and not an accident. And it's not just the threat of layoffs or AI and shitified jobs. Bosses are dragging us into the office despite every indication that we're as productive outside of the office as in it, and they're walking back already thin commitments to ensuring our workplaces are more diverse, equitable, inclusive, and accessible as they cave to outside pressure. The trends aren't looking good, and it would be unwise to assume things will change if we don't do something about it. Fortunately, I think that we have the values and the skills that are necessary to meet the moment and protect what makes this community amazing and our labor valuable. Coincidentally, those values and skills translate very well into successful labor organizing. First of all, we can self-organize. Literally look around us. The beauty of Hacker Summer Camp, not counting Black Hat, which I don't, comes from a practically all volunteer effort to organize 4 conferences where we defer to each other based on reputation, expertise, and commitment to getting stuff done. As a community, we've bought into these models of self-governance and volunteer expertise, especially in the leadership of B-Sides and many of the villages at DEF CON, not because we had to, but because we're practitioners who recognize skill when we see it and can and will call BS when that skill isn't there. Similar models of practitioner-driven self-governance with deference to trusted community leaders can be found in open source foundations and projects that serve as cornerstones for much of our work. And that's all without a CEO or shareholders making us do it for a paycheck or stock equity. We're organizing ourselves as volunteers to provide our skills and labor with mutual aid efforts to the parts of our broader communities that need it most through initiatives like the Cyber Resilience Corps and DEF CON Franklin. And then we also know how to organize ourselves into kick-butt affinity groups that support each other and build sub-communities that make the overall cybersecurity community bigger, stronger, and more inclusive. And again, we've done all of that on our own and for each other. We know how to advocate. We know how to advocate outside of our community without waiting for someone to swoop in and do it for us. Hackers on the Hill organizes hackers every year to meet with members of Congress and their staff. I Am the Cavalry is downstairs right now building connections between our community and critical infrastructure communities, and then advocating for critical infrastructure to get the security resources and incentives that it needs. Going back to the 2000s, we've been self-organizing to advocate for policy changes that would let us do public interest work without fear of criminal penalties from Section 1201 of the DMCA. As far as our values go, we are an outspoken and autonomous bunch. We are certainly not afraid to tell those in power what we think or to call BS when we smell it. Since the 90s, we've been telling politicians that they don't know what they're doing to their face and ensuring the hacker voice is heard by policymakers. We also love our autonomy. We're certainly not afraid to stand out from the crowd, and we put a lot of work into building and supporting systems like Tor and Signal that let us privately communicate and maintain our autonomy in the face of government and corporate surveillance. Since the Hacker Manifesto, I would argue, we've explicitly recognized that our ability to challenge entrenched systems comes from individual thinking and, crucially, that we must work together to preserve our ability to act as individuals. So that may be all fine and dandy, but what does that have to do with union things? Glad you asked. Legally, formally in the United States, this is what a union, or technically a labor organization, is. In its most basic form, a union is any organization outside of your employer's control that you and your colleagues elect to represent you in negotiations with your employer. The law spells out some stereotypical bargaining categories like grievances, pay, hours, benefits, but I want to draw attention to the conditions of work clause at the very end there and encourage you to think creatively about what bargaining over our conditions of work might look like for our industry. Now, as, if not more importantly, are your legal rights as an employee. In addition to being able to form, join, or assist a union without reprisal from your employer, you have labor rights with or without a union. Specifically, you have the right to engage in other concerted activities for mutual aid or protection, which I'll get into more detail in a few slides. Now, unfortunately, United States labor law kind of sucks in a lot of ways, and it does exclude managers and independent contractors from having any of those rights. So, if you're in the private sector and you're interested in forming a union, here's a very simplified overview of what that process looks like. If you've ever organized a standing interest-based group within our community like a village, this shouldn't feel too unfamiliar. First, a majority of workers organize, decide to form a union, and what structure that union will take. This can include deciding who you want to be included in the scope of your union, like a single team, an office location, or your entire company, which larger union you want to affiliate with, or if you want to start your own, and which colleagues you want running the union, bargaining on your behalf, and representing you in conflicts with your employer. If you can run a nonprofit, manage a CFP, and run a village or conference in the mayhem of the Las Vegas heat, you can probably do this, and if you're here participating in it, then you're probably familiar with structures that abide by similar principles. Now, after the union is recognized, which is a big, long, oftentimes contentious process that is very hard to do, but if you just skim over all of that, you get recognized, yay! You bargain a contract that covers everyone in that union, regardless of if they voted for the union or if they're a dues-paying member or not. Bargaining is where your boss is legally required to reach an agreement with you and your dedicated representatives. It's where you can tell your CIO, your HR department, and every other leader visited by the Good Idea Fairy or some useless management consultant that their ideas are as workable as an Intel executable on a new Mac, and that it's not something that you're going to agree to. Speaking from personal experience, it can be a great feeling to tell someone who doesn't know how to do your job that their new idea is flatly unworkable. The form of this contract and bargaining can vary depending on how you decided to structure your union in that first step. It can be a very specific group of employees within your organization, maybe the SOC team, organized to get better pay, schedules, on-call treatment, and AI protections, and now they're negotiating a contract that just covers the SOC team. For example, Code CWA's Alphabet Workers United organized some Accenture workers that contract for Google's content team into a union. The CWA has also organized quality assurance workers at Blizzard to reach agreements that just cover those specific teams. It could also be all employees at your employer. This is more typical in small to medium-sized businesses and in white-collar employers. This is where everyone joins the same union, regardless of their team or position. These industrial unions are pretty powerful because it allows you to bargain along your employer's entire line of operations and not as easily lose to like divide and conquer strategies that employers will frequently use among different parts of your workforce. So this could be everyone at your small pen test company deciding to unionize to get guaranteed training opportunities and a clear salary scale. Now, finally, there are craft unions or guild unions that negotiate master contracts with multiple employers. These are pretty rare in new unions and are mainly in the building trades or occasionally in the arts trades like the Writers Guild, Screen Actors Guild, things like that. They're pretty hard to build and establish over time, especially because it kind of requires there to be employer concentration. But I think it's worth thinking about. The Sky Talk yesterday proposed a guild model, and while they do take time to build, given the fast-moving nature of our industry and bringing the same skills to multiple employers, rotating quickly, I think it is a model that's worth pondering on and thinking about if it's something that we want to build towards. After you have your contract, your union represents you if your employer violates that contract or other laws that protect you at work, and then they advocate for your interests beyond the workplace, which again, I'll touch on in a few more slides. So, back to those rights that I mentioned earlier. If you don't have a union but still want to improve your workplace, which I think covers a lot of people who raised their hands here, that's where those rights that you have still come in. Your right to engage in concerted activity for mutual aid and protection lets you put those skills that you've gained heckling NSA directors to legally protected use. As long as you're doing it with or for a friend and it's related to your status as employees, I'll say that this area of labor law has a lot of gray lines, fuzzy areas, and important caveats, so definitely talk with someone who knows more about this before doing anything too risky. But in general, if you're advocating to improve your working conditions with one other person, your boss is legally not allowed to do anything to retaliate against you. So, for example, of what some of those protections can look like, you can talk about your wages and working conditions. That is categorically protected. It is legal for your employer to have a policy forbidding a discussion about your wages and your pay, as well as forbidding you from talking about the union as long as they let you talk about literally any other non-work activity on the job. You have the right to collectively confront your boss about your work. Your boss can set up Zoom meetings with HR to ambush you. You and your colleagues have the right to do the same to your boss. And you can strike without a union. You and your coworkers can agree not to work, including when you're needed most, to pressure your boss over an egregious working condition. If you're working 18-hour incident response shifts, you and your colleagues can refuse to work the next one until your boss agrees to provide some safe staffing levels. And then if and when your rights are violated by your employer, you can file a complaint with the National Labor Relations Board, who provides an attorney to prosecute the case for you. So, what about the public sector? For my fellow feds, there are unfortunately some key differences between public sector union rights and private sector rights. However, that first slide about forming a union and having a contract and having that contract be enforced, that's all broadly the same. The first thing is that we don't get that mutual aid protections to be able to creatively organize when we don't have a union, and we're also categorically forbidden from legally striking. However, we do get some more vigorous whistleblower protections for our individual concerns, and these rights extend to managers too. Private sector also has whistleblowing protections, but I am not an expert in them, so I'm not really going to talk about them because I don't know them super well. As feds, we usually don't bargain over pay and benefits, certainly not if you're on the GS scale, though there are some smaller independent agencies that do bargain pay directly with their agency. But instead, unions provide that institutional lobbying voice to lobby Congress and the president over pay setting and maintaining solid benefits, as we recently did with the Big Beautiful Bill, and got a lot of stuff that would have destroyed federal benefits out of there through the power of unions sticking together and advocating on the Hill. And as I mentioned earlier, the president can exclude agencies, components, or positions from collective bargaining for national security reasons. The president can declare, essentially without any checks, as the courts have affirmed on Monday, that any position is too national security critical to have a union, and tell an agency to no longer collectively bargain or respect existing contracts. Even when, CBP can have a union, they're not national security critical too much to lose their union rights, but FDA health inspectors and Forest Service people are. It's blatant pretext to strike back against the institutions that have been pushing back against this current administration's agenda and winning in a lot of cases. But nonetheless, the courts are kind of compromised, if you haven't noticed, and will let the president, by fiat, declare that people don't have rights. And also, the whole point of that law is to prevent spook unions. So if you're in the NSA or FBI, you're probably not going to get a union, and you probably shouldn't have one. And then for state and local workers, it really differs by state and goes from no rights to all the rights. If you work for a state or local government, check with your state or local law. It varies kind of by political breakdown exactly how you would expect. As I alluded to earlier, unions don't just exist in the workplace. They are advocacy organizations that, yes, advocate through legally binding contracts that cover a job, but also advocate for broader policy change and political power that benefits their members and working people. As good as we hackers may be getting at advocacy, we simply don't have the numbers that you get from building a coalition with working people across the country. Unions' membership numbers and genuine ability to mobilize their members make them an institutionally recognized force at levels of politics all up and down the spectrum, and create an effective leverage point to push policy positions. Larger unions or groups and coalitions of unions are generally happy to carry water for niche interests among their members, especially when they don't conflict with their other members' interests. So, in other terms, unions have a pretty robust policy command and control infrastructure that we could reuse to deliver our messages and our political policy payloads. We can dramatically improve our leverage by making things like critical infrastructure protection, right to repair, robust cybersecurity and privacy requirements, and DMCA reform workers' issues, not just hackers' issues. To move from some abstract details to successes in or near our industry, the Alphabet Workers Union has won significant changes at Google without an exclusive union or exclusive bargaining rights. They formed what's called a pre-majority union, so they haven't had an election to become the exclusive representative of Google or other Alphabet workers, and Alphabet isn't required to bargain with them. Instead, they're organizing across Google's employees, contractors, and vendors to pressure and win concessions from Google. They've gotten the National Labor Relations Board to overturn a gag order on employees discussing Google's current antitrust cases, affirming the inherent legal right that everyone has to discuss their working conditions, even if your employer has a policy saying that you can't discuss it. And yes, the antitrust status of your work is a working condition. They've pressured Google to use voluntary buyouts instead of layoffs during the recent tech industry layoff wave. They've gotten Google to extend the deadline for its return to office policy, allowing workers more flexibility to change the living situation or find a new job. And as I briefly mentioned earlier, they did win one exclusive bargaining unit with Accenture workers contracted for Google's content team to help win protections for those folks there and do some actually exclusive, legally binding bargaining. There's also this small, relatively unheard of nonprofit around here called the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I don't know if anyone's heard of them. They formed a union about 2 years ago and got their first contract in October. From what I've told, the EFF staff organized not in response to any particularly bad working conditions or a specific threat, but also they organized to take the good conditions that they already had and just take it out of their leadership's complete and total discretion and put it into a legally binding contract that staff and leadership negotiated over. In typical EFF fashion, they are fantastic and posted their entire contract online, so anyone can go and look up the wins that they got. These include guaranteed remote work, employee and management engagement in DEI initiatives, clear pay scales and raise structures, anti-bossware guarantees, and rental assistance for employees in the Bay Area. So many kudos to Cindy Cohen and the EFF leadership team for walking the talk on their professed values, and many more kudos to the EFF staff who took the brave step to organize and win a robust contract. It's stuff like this that makes me proud to be a monthly EFF donor and member. What was that? I'll cover questions at the end, just because I'm trying to make sure I cover time, but I will lock that one down. Basically not being spied on by your boss and monitoring when it isn't needed. So at my organization, we had a more typical union origin story many, many years ago, long before I started there. We organized when a new leader came in and started making unilateral, unpopular changes that prompted employees to form a union so that that boss couldn't make additional unpopular changes without having to bargain, or at least without a fight from workers. Since then, we've also won remote and flexible work as a contractual guarantee and are fighting to ensure that what is still a legally valid contract is fully enforced. We've bargained over technology rollouts, including AI, to ensure they benefited how we actually got our work done and weren't a harebrained management disruption onto how we actually do our jobs. And while security is still a management right, we get to bargain how security controls are implemented when they affect working conditions. It's in discussions like these where the power of having a multidisciplinary union across an organization really shines through. So I, as a cybersecurity person, can dig into the technical specifics of what managers are proposing and communicate the importance of having robust security and privacy protections to my coworkers, but my colleagues who work more on the mission or business side of things can provide feedback on how that control will actually affect their work and when it will probably disrupt their ability to get their work done. For management, technical bargaining like this and impact rollouts is essentially a free consultancy, user feedback session, and we get to fix a lot of the stuff that they didn't think about, because this may surprise you, but management doesn't talk to each other across organizational lines once you get above a medium-sized organization, but workers do, and so we can actually talk and work something out between us as cybersecurity workers with our users and business side workers that make usable security controls actually be implemented and meet the organization's needs. So despite some of these success stories, I know that there are a lot of reservations and counter arguments about unions. There's certainly a lot of propaganda that gets funded to provide some anti-union talking points, especially in some of the high-paying, high-skilled, or more technical work. So let's walk through some of those common ones. The one that these rights that I'm talking about don't matter because employers violate them all the time. And yes, it is true that employers violate the law for pretty much every one of the rights that I have talked about so far. As I said earlier, the president has decided that he thinks he can just take them away, and private sector employers will do a lot to ignore the law. It could take years for a complaint to be processed by the National Labor Relations Board, and the remedy is essentially a slap on the wrist for employers. In the meantime, employers frequently use the time a case is processing the NLRB to shut down union organizing or fire active employees. That said, those rights are still your rights, and while they may be a pain in the butt to enforce, the only way to ensure that they get used at all and aren't effectively meaningless is to use them. More importantly, the power that we have as workers has never come from the law. The law has been a convenient backstop. It's great to have those institutions and resources there and in the worst case abuses, but the unions didn't come from the law. The law came from unions. Unions were organizing in the private and the public sectors decades before anyone said it was legal to do so, and our ability to use the labor that is necessary to create value wherever we work and to leverage that labor is always going to be the source of our power. In addition, when you and your coworkers come together with allies, you can identify the other stakeholders and institutions that have leverage over your employee, whether that's their public relations, their investors, their supply chains. Research those and leverage those pain points to make it easier for your employer to work with you than to fight you. There's the argument that unionizing leads to being outsourced or being fired. So again, it is illegal for your employer to retaliate against unionization efforts with threats of outsourcing or offshoring. But as I just said, just because it's illegal doesn't mean your employer won't do it. And again, it comes back to the point where our power comes from being well organized and to being ready to fight these threats, not necessarily from having the law ready to back us up, because the law occasionally will fall short, unfortunately. Though if your employer has decided that it's cheaper to offshore you than to respect you, then they're probably going to eventually offshore or outsource you anyways. They might do it slower, where it's harder to organize against because there's no one single flashpoint to organize against. But if your boss is feeling the pressure to make cuts and cut costs, then keeping your head down probably won't protect you. Organizing and making it painful for them to make cuts will protect you much more than keeping your head down will. There's the concern that unions are corrupt or ineffective. And yes, some unions were historically corrupt, and some of the larger unions have not been as effective in organizing as I personally would like. They are ultimately democracies. The smaller and closer to workers a union structure is, the more responsive it will be to your concerns. And you can always run against an ineffective leader, or just organize around them, or even vote to be represented by a different union. You cannot outvote your boss. You can't outvote the union that you're a democratic member of. There's a concern that unions are Luddites. So first of all, don't knock the Luddites. Read Blood in the Machine for some historical perspective on workers' fight to control their work in hyper-exploitative conditions. Most unions want to make their members' jobs easier and will happily embrace technology that does that and that they control. To the extent that technology threatens their members' existing jobs or work, unions can serve as a democratic forum for technologists and impacted workers to hash out an ideal alignment with a fair transition and clear pathways for workers. As I mentioned earlier, I get to do this very frequently at my organization, where we represent both the technologists developing the technology and the users who are going to use it. And it's great to be able to come together and reach an agreement that works for all of us. Unions will take and waste my dues money. So your dues money is more than going to pay for itself in pay and benefit increases. That money also goes to organizing more workers, which makes the labor market even more competitive when more workers are organized. Dues money also goes to help unions advocate for issues that raise the wage floors. Rising tide lifts all boats, even if it's not something that you feel immediately or see on your pay stub. And then finally, especially I think for this crowd, there's the concern that unions will take your autonomy by eliminating privileges for high performers and destroying our relationships with our bosses that might be pretty cordial or working out pretty well. The current level of autonomy that you feel is because your boss has decided to grant it to you, and they can take it away or threaten it when they decide that they no longer need to offer it to you. By making a small sacrifice for a small amount of your autonomy for a collective contract, you build a shield that guarantees protections for you and your ability to act autonomously in the workplace. You also have the autonomy within a union democracy to campaign against agreements that you disagree with and try to get your colleagues to vote them down. So, To tie things back to the current moment, we are in a unique position as information security workers to protect each other and our communities, and we will only get there if each one of us decides to do something about it. It is a lovely paradox where our individual actions won't save us, but will only build sufficient collective action if we take action as individuals. Thankfully, there are movements with the infrastructure and community to support us, and we don't have to do it alone. For us, specifically as information security workers, we are uniquely positioned because everything is in fact computer. Computers are how policy is turned into material reality, how payments reach our neighbors, and how social interactions are mediated. As I argued at the top of the talk, the current form of fascism realized this and really wants complete and total control over the computers with no ability for us to use our labor to dissent. They do not have enough people with the combination of competence and loyalty required for them to meet their objectives by themselves, so they want us to get in line and be afraid of them. If computers are the spinal cord of government, and really in most organizations, InfoSec is the bones, protecting it and ensuring that the nerves stay in place. Given our positions of control over these systems, we can either rapidly allow bad actors to get in, or we can enforce the guardrails that we know should be in place. If we try to protect it as individuals, no matter how elite we are, how many black badges, or how many talks we've given, they'll just fire us and replace us with the next person who will do what they want. If we organize our response, they have to spend time fighting us that they'd rather spend using what we built and protect to screw over our neighbors. As InfoSec workers, we're also uniquely positioned to force concessions from our bosses. By the time we're being hired, our bosses either have highly valuable assets that they want to protect or burdensome and costly compliance regulations that they're trying to be in line with. The marginal losses from losing those assets from an incident or from a heavy fine are dramatically higher than the cost of what we're normally asking for. That gives us a lot more leverage than, say, the typical tech worker who's building a new product that hasn't yet been integrated into an organization's value stream. If we look to Cory Doctorow's causal theory of enshittification is prevented by strong competition, regulation, interoperability, and worker power. I'm not going to count on any antitrust enforcement over the next 3.5 years. And while we might maybe see some regulations on tech issues, maybe some right to repair laws and interoperability requirements come down at the state level, I'm personally not going to be super invested in state legislatures or any legislature taking robust action to meet the current moment. My confidence in those institutions isn't super strong. Our leverage as workers is the only systemic lever that we can count on not being captured, and we are the only ones who are able to pull it. So, our rights, are not something that you just have to take from me. Take the word of Daniel Baroulis, a cybersecurity professional at the National Labor Relations Board who blew the whistle on suspicious activity in their Azure environment. He and maybe one or two other people were the only ones with the visibility into these systems. No one else could have flagged this or saved the day. In his words, you're not alone, and you have rights that empower you, and there is a community that is here to support you. Your rights to speak out about your workplace conditions and legally blow the whistle, as both Google workers and Dan have shown us, carry more weight than your NDA or corporate policy. Our bosses may want us to feel like atomized individuals, but we are not. There is a community that has each other's backs when we step up. And that community isn't really waiting for us either. The labor movement has recognized that privacy rights are workers' rights. Unions, with the help of community allies like EFF, have been leading the legal fight against Doge's invasions into our privacy. Unions have also been leading the way into bargaining fair AI use into their contracts and advocating for policy restraints on AI controlling and surveilling us at work instead of the other way around. When ransomware incidents strike, other unions have been creatively showing what it looks like to demand an effective and transparent response and ensure a properly resourced cybersecurity program to protect their working conditions. And now I grabbed this slide because I was at CyberMedCon a year ago, and Dina, whose last name I'm blanking on, from OPEIU Local 40, representing nurses in eastern Michigan around Detroit, came in, and because their union was being very vocal after the Accenture ransomware attack that took out 140 hospitals, and they were going on the news and advocating for, like, we weren't prepared for this. Our organization might have an IT incident response plan, but we as nurses are completely swimming upstream when it comes to running a hospital in a ransomware incident. And so now, Gina came here yesterday and was here at the I Am the Cavalry track, and they are getting a ransomware clause into their contract. They are making sure that they have the protections in place to be able to respond to those incidents. Now, there are large swaths of workers in every field who are ready and willing to be in solidarity with us. And again, just kind of speaking personally from a moment, like, I love cybersecurity work. I love getting root. I love finding the thing that makes things better. I love it when my code runs and compiles. That sense of dopamine is great. It's what got me into this industry. Nothing makes me feel better at night or is as nourishing for the soul or makes me feel like I have neighbors in the community than doing this labor work. From enforcing my contract, getting a simple term, joining a picket line with food service workers who are fighting for better contracts at their jobs, standing with other federal workers who are trying to save civil services right now. That's the type of stuff that can be exhausting, it can be draining, but the relationships that you build doing this work, it can be scary, but it is the most rewarding work I have done in my entire life. The way that we win, what we do next is, first of all, build relationships. That's the theme I've heard throughout all of B-Sides in multiple contexts. Relationships are how we win. If you're a manager, basically be chill about it. I think there's a lot of, if you're here, I'm going to assume you're a good manager. If your employees try to unionize, it's not because they hate you specifically or it's a personal attack. Like the folks at EFF, they might just want to get the good conditions enshrined into a contract. But basically, when you let your employees unionize, you also get like a dedicated workforce who will give you honest feedback and not become an insider threat because they feel like they, are respected at their work, and that's pretty cool too. They'll also, give you some better ideas and not have turnover. So that's nice. And then there are other things that you can do outside in civil society. And then for the rest of us, I think these are some great organizations that are here to help you if you don't have a union, if it's just you and you're looking to get started. I'm going to call out the top, the Tech Workers Coalition, which I'm a part of. I've got some friends here who are with me. We'll be here to answer questions. Please join. And then once you join and get added to the Slack, come to the cybersecurity channel. We're there. We're waiting for you to have a conversation, to provide you resources, to answer what comes next or what can you do, to chat, give you whatever advice that we can. This isn't, go out and be great in vague terms. There are concrete resources for you. The QR code, I promise, is safe. It's just the GitHub that has all of these resources and the slides, as well as many, many, many more resources, like this fantastic book, You Deserve a Tech Union, if you're looking for some reading material. There are some unions that represent tech workers. So there's Code CWA, which includes the Alphabet Workers Union. They're also organizing at Microsoft. OPIU, Local 1010, is doing some work as well, organizing mostly smaller tech companies. And IFPTE, I've got to shout out my own union. They don't really focus on organizing tech workers as much. They mostly organize STEM workplaces and nonprofits that tend to include tech workers, but both me and EFF are represented by IFPTE, so I've got to give them a shout out. I really enjoy the representation that they provide. So, and yes, this is a pitch for tools that will help you in your workplace, but this is also a cry for help and an ask for solidarity. My working conditions are tied to our industry's working conditions, and our industry working conditions only improve if we all do something about it. There's a community and a movement that's ready and excited to support you, but no one can do it for you. So my ask is to go out there, organize, hack your working conditions, and win. Thank you very much for listening, and don't forget to tip your bartenders and cleaning service. And I think I've got time for like one question. Possibly. I don't know where the mic is. I can, if someone wants to yell something out and I can repeat it. I'll also be out after.
So you said that that it will regardless go to cheaper workers anyways at some point again. Do you think that it's a problem with not the news lately about foreign workers coming with the visas? Do you see that as a threat to it, or is that helping the industry by bringing more talent to it?
So like a comment was on like H-1B visas and like the tech workers who come in from other countries. So yeah, I think that internationalism is really important, and the idea that our working conditions are inherently tied together extends beyond like geographic borders. Like it is inherently a global industry. I think that like to the H-1B visa point, like I'm very glad that there's good tech jobs in the United States that other people have access to. I also think that the H-1B visa program in particular is incredibly exploitative because it ties your ability to stay in the United States to having a job. And so if you say wanted to speak out about your working conditions or improve them, and your boss fires you, even if it's illegal, that doesn't matter because then you've got to leave the country. So you're much more tied down, and it makes it harder for you to be in solidarity, for you to fight against your boss when you're on those visa conditions. So I think there's definitely a need for reform there and the protections that come with those visa programs. But I think once workers start seeing other workers, as threats based on their countries of origin, again, that destroys that community, that destroys those relationships, and that's how we start to lose. And I'm at Logan Arkema pretty much everywhere. Full government name. Come fire me, Elon, or whomever you send your way. And I'm getting the stop sign, so I'm going to come hang out. We've got other people who have also done this work who are here to give to answer questions. We've got a handful of stickers on the table. Come say hi.
right, thank you. Thank you, everyone. All right, I'm kind of a pacer a little bit, so hopefully the microphone doesn't go in and out too much. But yeah, so I'm Caleb Sargent, and this is Blake. Just real quick intro, quick blurb about this talk. So this isn't about security itself being an illusion, because anything can eventually be broken, right? Anything at all. This is more about challenging the status quo that modern endpoint detections. That they're so advanced, right, that the only way they can be defeated is with advanced attacks, right, or super complex novel techniques. We just want to show that that is not true and that security can be broken actually with very easy methods. And then so who are we?
Everybody, yeah. I'm Blake Hudson. I am a adversary emulation team lead at PayPal, which is just essentially a very, very fancy way of saying that I do purple teaming and red team stuff. Roughly 7, almost 8 years of experience in the industry, kind of specializing in cloud security, infrastructure testing, and this is now my 5th talk. I started last year at BSides here and went on kind of like a slew of them last year, and back here again. This place is pretty awesome. And I just want to say, if any of you ever have any information to share, get up. I recommend doing this at least once in your career. It's a pretty interesting experience.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a great experience for me as well. Like I said, I'm Caleb Sargent. Oh, we missed a really good opportunity. You had that shirt on. I could have wore the same shirt. That would have been amazing. Yeah. But I'm an adversary emulation manager at PayPal. Basically, I do like a lot of bridge building between the red and the blue teams, helping them emulate threats, so they actually get like a red signal, right? I've been in offensive security for about 8 years now. I specialize in endpoint security controls and emails. I know people are emails. What? Well, actually, that's what those other 2 talks were about. So I recently did a talk in Troopers, Germany about some email stuff. So if you want, shameless plug, go look that up. And Black Hat, I did a talk with Hao Wang. He's also my manager in the crowd right there, and we did an email talk last year. So yes, highly recommend it. You'll learn a ton, and you'll meet some pretty cool people. Standard disclaimer, especially since we're here from PayPal. We could say this all we want. Hey, we're saying this from us. We don't represent the company, but they say, too bad you represent us anyways. However, there's a disclaimer up here anyways, right? With that out of the way, let's quickly talk about agenda. Sweet, it worked this time. Okay, so we're just going to quickly go over and talk about what endpoint controls are, some typical bypasses that you'll see, and exactly kind of why we are here and like what type of different approach we're taking. Then we'll talk about bypassing Zscaler, tampering with Defender, real attacks that actually work, and then we're going to have some more fun with some persistent admin, and then once again user stories. That'll be an interesting topic, and we will go from there. So, what are endpoint controls? So, can anybody name an endpoint control? Just shout one out. It's not up there. I tried. Failed the magic trick. But yeah, so it's really split into 2 different types, right? So we have like supportive and like direct sort of security controls. You have the things that are actually on the endpoint themselves, right? So CrowdStrike, you have agents, Defender, and then there's other ones that are more supportive, like Zscaler or like Jamf, Intune, right? That's going to be pushing custom scripts, doing something to protect the endpoint that isn't just running code, right? People get super hyper focused on stopping the shell, stopping running the code. There's so many other controls on that endpoint that you can break. And what are those typical bypasses, right? So we're all familiar with living off the land stuff, bringing your own vulnerable driver. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that one. Building your own custom payloads, doing some API hooking evasion, module stomping, DLL hollowing. I could just list all of them, right? These are all, like more complex sort of things that you do need to know how to code. You do need to, understand something about Windows system internals, et cetera, right? Well, the key challenge to this is that we want to just evade that traditional, like signature. So of doing these type of techniques, right? So, we want to bypass ANSI, for example, but we don't want to, write like a custom script for it. And that's exactly what makes this talk different, right? This actually started from a comprehensive evaluation of enterprise security controls that we were doing. We took a holistic approach to where we're not just looking at, hey, this is Defender, CrowdStrike, whatever, all these different things by themselves, but like as a complete stack. Like, how do they actually work, and what can we do to like break them and then not have like a signal, like be able to bypass and not have this our SOC, the blue team, be able to detect anything, right? And most importantly, we wanted to like challenge this like status quo type of term that's thrown around right now, tamper-proof, right? I don't know how many of you guys have advertised or have been advertised to that, hey, our product is completely tamper-proof, right? Well, we saw that and we were like, what does that actually mean? And like, what are you really claiming with this? So we wanted to like challenge that while we were doing this. And with that, how can we make this easier, right? So I'll take a step back, and then there will be like a little caveat with this, right? A lot of this stuff does require administrator access, right? So it does, you know, I think it even says, right, like, yeah, it fundamentally changes the security balance, which is true, but you could do a lot of really, really terrible things to endpoint, you know, with admin, we know that, but also as a low-level user. And here are going to be some of the things that a regular user, anybody could do, right? You can uninstall, you can manipulate the file system, there are custom scripts that are running. Who can access those scripts? Who can, you know, modify those? Who can modify registry, etc. So that is that, and we're going to start with Zscaler. I guess we're starting at the end of the alphabet. I don't know. We just decided that this is where we were starting. So when we started this, we wanted to like have some sort of like kind of like requisite for this, right? So a good way whenever you're doing research for things, especially like this, I'm sure people are familiar with the idea of memory, or not memory comparison, patch comparison, right? So you go and you look at one patch and the new patch, and you're like, cool, what's the difference, right? And then you go, you know, but that's way too complicated for us. So we just look at CVEs, right? So we go look at old CVEs. So did they fix this thing? And is there a new way to bypass it, right? So there are different techniques you can do that besides, you know, going and actually doing some patch diffing, right? So in certain cases, here it says Zscaler can be disabled by PowerShell commands, right? So we took this as the basis. All right, well, they claim to be tamper-proof. Let's actually see what they can do. So with that, I've talked about for 8 minutes, so now it's Blake's turn.
All right, so uninstalling Zscaler. So typically when you have Zscaler run on your system, you're going to go, an end user is only really going to go to, say, like the settings menu or control panel to try to uninstall it. And they'll get a pop-up window like this. You have to put in the password. Well, okay, that's that direction, but they don't anticipate a lot of users just going through programmatic access. Just very simple PowerShell commands. Okay, hey, use basically PowerShell wmic, get a whatever the application is based off of this name, Zscaler, and then append uninstall function. This will wipe out Zscaler from this. It doesn't ask you for a password whatsoever, and at that point, it's wiped from your system. Here's another route. Basically, this one's in the CMD terminal, but again, wmic command, find where it's like Zscaler, go ahead and uninstall it. Here's one that's a little bit different, but you use wmic to get the GUID for Zscaler, and then you use MSI exec to then uninstall it. And then just a pure PowerShell, get the package name like Zscaler, force uninstall. All of these, again, do not require any sort of password to do this. However, by today, they are fixed, or this has been fixed, and now there is a separate password you have to set to protect yourself from this way. So a lot of the stuff that we are going to talk about is fixed today. It might just be a misconfiguration on your own end if you don't have these things readily available or set. So something that a lot of organizations do as well is they try to enforce, you know, there might be some sort of security policy enforcing that you have Zscaler on your systems. Well, usually that's kind of pushed out by something like SCCM, and this is just kind of like an example. What you can do to try to stop that is just go hunting through your SCCM folder and just look for these installation files again. SCCM is going to be trying to roll this out at whatever predefined time period, and you could just go in and wipe these out. It's never going to get reinstalled. It seems like SCCM tries about once a week, and then after that, it gives up. So just kind of an interesting little side tidbit with it. Oh, back to you.
Back to me. Oh yeah, so this is super simple. Very poor man's way of uninstalling. You can do this on Linux and Mac, right? You just rename the thing, and after you rename the thing, you just reboot, and then you can just remove it, right? And the reason you have to reboot it is because it does put locks on a lot of these, these files, and we don't want pesky locks, so we restart the system, and then hey, we are now Zscaler disabled, and then we just and then we just get rid of it. And speaking of, we can also abuse built-in scripts. So this is kind of what we were talking about with the like the Intune and the Jamf, even SCCM to an extent, right? So things get pushed out and a script gets ran, right? And sometimes you can modify and like get all screwy with them. Sweet, this video actually looks great on this screen. I wasn't sure I was gonna look. So it's a video, but I just wanna kinda like walk you through what's gonna happen, and then I'll talk through the rest of everything, right? Okay, so we're gonna uninstall Zscaler, but we're going to not, we're not gonna like just use like, the method before. We're not just gonna rename stuff, right? We're actually gonna use the proper executable to uninstall this. Well, if you've looked at some applications, they have like a bunch of like weird scripts sometimes in there, and they don't really you don't really know what they do. And that's what we found here. So we're just looking at our Mac, and then we see within the Zscaler directory that we have a whole bunch of scripts, right? Like config any, clear data, etc., right? Well, this clear data one was the one that I thought was really interesting, right? So I was like, what does clear data do? So, I, hackerish, I'll look at it, and then I'm like, hey, this is deleting a generic password with like com.zscaler everything, right? And I'm like, that sounds really bad. Like, what happens if an administrator just ran this like out of order, and you didn't know what happened? So that's exactly what I did. So we take this, or we look at the script, and then we're going to run this clear data, and then that's exactly what it does. It goes through and it deletes everything out of the keychain that says com.zscaler, right? Well, the way Zscaler works is it actually sets a password locally whenever you want to uninstall it, right? And whenever you run the uninstall script itself, it goes and it validates that password. It checks it, right? But if that password isn't there, anybody guess what happens to that? Yeah, it fails open, right? Cool. Yeah, we love when it fails open. So that's exactly what happens. Woohoo, right? So we run the script. The password's no longer there. It compares against nothing. And whoa, where's Zscaler go? Yeah, that was my thought too. It's gone. So so you just use the regular uninstall command or executable, but you run a prerequisite script. So this actually tells you some information about like some other security products, right? They're probably storing a local password. If there's a password to tamper-proof it, it's probably on the system itself somewhere. So if you delete that password and it goes to do something, it just may fail open for you as well. So that was a pretty cool trick. No, I won't bore you guys again. All right, more bypassing Zscaler, and back to Blake.
Yeah, and that's kind of like a common theme with a lot of this stuff too, is the same tactics work across multiple different products and even things that we're not talking about here today. The same ideas kind of applied to a lot of different stuff across the board. But, so bypassing Zscaler, yeah, so one of the things that we kind of tested, and we use this great tool called EDR Silencer out there. I wish I knew who actually created that because I'd give them a shout out. But essentially it is putting in WFP filters, basically kind of like firewall filters, and you point it at the specific binary. So when the processes start up, it will just basically block cloud access out to the internet for these specific things. And you can see here in the image, the Zscaler is having an AV error, and it can't reach out to the internet. What does it do by default? Fails open. So you now can access whatever you want out on the internet, and then basically remove all of these firewall filters, and you're right back on, and basically kind of no one knows that you did anything to circumvent it. Another really, really simple one is just keep killing the tunnel, the process. I created a really simple bat file. Every second is going through task kill, just kill that ZSA tunnel process over and over and over again. It keeps failing, fails open. You get access to the full internet at that point. And again, both of these have actually been fixed, and they have process protection on these things now, so you can't do these. But the same idea is, again, across the board. You could try this with a ton of different security endpoint tools out there. VPNs. I'm sure everybody here, or at least some people have, you can go out to AWS, stand up an open VPN server very, very quickly, just a couple minutes, install the client locally on your system, force all the traffic through that VPN, and you bypass Zscaler completely as well. Get whatever you need, whatever malware from the internet, install it on your system, turn this off, and hey, Zscaler doesn't have any idea what you just did. Oh, this is a fun one. So this is actually as a low-level user. In the registry, there's something called the PAC file, and I don't remember what that stands for.
Proxy thing, yeah.
Yeah, that thing, yeah. So this PAC file, this is actually the rules, essentially what Zscaler is going to be following for like allowing or blocking specific things. Well, a low-level user could go right into the registry and then set this to whatever they would like this to be. So you could put another local file up there, you could put it on a remote cloud server, something else on your internal network, and basically on Windows you could tell it, allow everything, and this would fully bypass everything for Zscaler as well. And then point it right back to the original thing and you're back in action. No one in your SOC would even notice. I think it was a little bit different on Mac.
Yeah, I was about to say, Blake went up to me on that one. He got it to work on Windows and tried my damnedest. I cannot get it to work on Mac because the way Mac actually handles the entire proxying, it defaults to Zscaler, not the PAC file itself. Oh yeah, so this is actually kind of like where everything started, right? This entire this everything, right? So I was looking at Zscaler and I was like, well, how can I like mess with this, right? So I started looking at a plist file. Any Mac gurus out here know what? Yeah, there you go. What the plist file is, right? It's basically like a properties list. It says, hey, this is the application, and these are the things when it runs. It needs to like know about these things. First of all, one is an environment variable for this one set is OPT, and it actually just passed in the string Zscaler, right? So what happens if you just remove Zscaler? That's exactly what I did, right? So I just went in and I edited the plist file. I took the word Zscaler out of there because if it doesn't know what this variable is, then it just fails, right? And this goes back to the same thing. It's failing and then it has some sort of error. Zscaler is actually pretty good about giving some sort of error within the little GUI. That's kind of like pointing you in the right direction. Later on, we do have some configuration fixes, so it's not all doom and gloom. There are ways to fix this to like not make it fail open, but these were configured in a way to like, hey, if you broke this, the traffic would just go out wherever, right? And then you just, so that was pretty cool. Once again, just like Blake did, you just take down the tunnel, right? So if anybody's done any sort of like Wi-Fi work, that's exactly what you're doing right here. You just take down the tunnel or the interface and then use a packet filter. Hey, anything that comes through this tunnel, drop it, right? And then you actually get like a different error in here, basically kind of the same thing. Another one, restarting from the UI, right? So we give users access to the UI in a lot of things, right? And a lot of it is, like locked down, but in this case, you can actually really just spam that button. You can just spam it, and then for about 10 seconds, like Zscaler was none the wiser to whatever you were doing, right? This also doesn't require admin root. Once again, this is another configuration that you can change, but as you see, does anybody know what this is that I'm running over here? Or what we downloaded from that code? Anybody look at it? Tell? Nope. That's secrets dump, right? So yeah, we downloaded secrets dump. Zscaler doesn't care, but generally it does. It does block that. It does not like it. Another way, by default, we could actually just download and install Tor, and all of the Tor traffic would go through Zscaler. Like it didn't care. And I was like, that's kind of weird, right? Like Zscaler, you would think network proxy, like block the bad network stuff, right? Well, it didn't. Well, right? Yeah, exactly. .onion, never heard of the guy, sort of thing. So yeah, this also doesn't require admin root. And of course, somebody is going to be somebody from policy out there is screaming right now, well, you shouldn't allow applications that you don't know what are installed, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there's actually another bypass for that. That's this top one up here, right? It says like Safari Lite, cool, you allow Safari Lite in your environment. And that's what we did. Well, that's not actually Safari Lite up in the top. We just, once again, told a plist file that, hey, this is actually Safari Lite, but that's really Tor. So we just renamed Tor to Safari Lite, and we're like, cool, we're in business again, right? So don't come at me with your policies, you know. And then this is pretty simple too. Like if you work with Python or anything in your environment, this is a common thing, right? You know, like if you from the terminal you want to run, you know, something over some sort of proxy, that's what you do here. And there's our secrets dump right there. This is like once again is no big secret. You can kind of do this anywhere, but this does by default bypass Zscaler. And once again, we're not just beating up on them. They just like exemplified a lot of the things that we were coming across, and we found ways to bypass that. And then kudos onto them. We'll talk about it a little bit more later, but they did fix a good amount of these issues. And then, all right, we're done with that one. So we also did this to Defender.
Yeah, good stuff here. So bypassing Defender. Well, obviously with the same thing, EDR silencer, it's kind of built into the tool name, right? Putting in these WFP filters, you can just point it at the Defender Advanced Threat Protection, so the EDR portion of it, and it will block all of the cloud access. And you can do this manually as well. This is just an easy, convenient tool to do it. But this will basically silence so all of the telemetry doesn't go out to your SOC anymore. And the one thing you still have to worry about, obviously, is the Defender AV is still working, so that will still send data out. But at least from the SOC's perspective, if they're only paying attention to the Advanced Threat Terminal, they're not going to see anything that you're doing at this point. And then very, very simple, you can just turn off or remove all of these filtering blocks. That's a pretty standard one. And then this kind of goes out there, I'm sure a lot of people already know this, but if you give people local admin on their Windows systems, you could just download something like Mimikatz. Obviously, Defender is going to catch it. It's going to quarantine it and then delete it. Well, maybe a lot of people don't know this. You can just open up Defender's console locally and restore it back to disk. And then there's another pop-up that says, do you want to allow it? Yes. Mimikatz is whitelisted on your system now. And you can see you run it perfectly fine. So that's something, you know, we're also sharing a lot of this too, so that you can take this back to your own organization, run these same things, make sure you have detections, because all this stuff, no one should be doing in your environment whatsoever. And after we did a lot of this stuff, we were finding people in our network doing these things. So, yes, pay attention to that. Okay, what about fully disabling EDR? So here is a video. I'll kind of walk through it real quick. We're just going to show here that the MS Sense or the Advanced Threat Protection is running. And then we're just going to go through and show like the permissions on it. You can see that Trusted Installer is basically the owner. And then we're going to go through and there's a really, really critical DLL, mssense.dll. Well, you can tamper with that and then completely wipe out and disable the EDR portion of Microsoft Defender very, very easily. And okay, so yep, we're just showing that it's running. We can see that the MSDLL, yep, and it is owned by Trusted Installer. What we're going to do first here is take ownership of it, and then we're going to give administrators full access to that specific file. Once we do that, we're just going to go ahead and rename it. You can delete it. At this point, you have full ownership of this specific DLL. Go ahead, reboot, and when this comes back online, you'll see MS Sense keep trying to start up the service, but it fails because it doesn't know where this really important DLL is now. And at this point, the EDR will be completely killed. Your SOC has no visibility into what your system is doing. They can't quarantine you. They can't isolate your system. They can't jump in and take any sort of preventive actions. And you can see it is, the service has stopped now. And we have a pretty good response from Microsoft about that.
And then, so we disabled the EDR portion. For those aren't familiar, Defender has like two different, well, it depends on who you ask. But it has two main parts, right? It has like an antivirus and it has like the EDR portion, right? The actual like protection piece, and it does all the telemetry and everything, right? Well, Blake, he disabled the EDR, right? I couldn't be one up, so I had to, disable the AV itself. And I'll go ahead and pause this and I'll kind of talk through it a little bit first as well. So I'm running MDAP Health on the Mac, which basically says, hey, like, what is the status? And tell me everything about Defender, what is going on with the system itself. And then as you see, it's like, hey, it's healthy, it's true, it's running. We're going to make it very unhealthy here in a second, though. So, and we're going to do that, once again, by permissions. So with Defender is what you need is it needs definitions, right? It needs a library of definitions to be able to say, hey, this is bad, right? Sort of thing. So is what we're going to do is we're going to go into Defender and we're going to change the permissions to the entire directory and make it where nobody could touch it, right? Like not even root, right? So we're going to give it no permissions, and whenever it does that, we're going to restart the system, and whenever the AV goes to check back in to the libraries to see if it can do the thing, it's not going to be able to do the thing. So anticipate seeing that. All right. Back in the beginning, we run this. I'm downloading the iCar file. I don't know if anybody's familiar with what that is, but basically it's a file. If you ever want to test AV like CLAM or whatever and say, hey, is this seeing the bad thing? You can download it and it'll see the bad thing. And as you see, Defender actually deleted it. It was like, yep, that's terrible. We'll actually pause the video right here. Yeah, it's like, hey, that's a bad thing. We're going to delete the file. So it says 0 files, whatever. 0 files are there because it already deleted it. Then we're going to go through and we're going to change the chmod to all zeros on that directory. And then we'll try to look at it. And we look at it, and then we see that, hey, this is actually now false for the MDAP health. We'll go ahead and restart. Time travel a little bit, and then we are actually just trying to update the AV, right? Just, hey, check the definitions, making sure they are all working, and once again, we'll check MDAP health. It is very unhealthy now, right? It's like, yeah, I'm not working at all. And just to demonstrate that it actually works, I'll download the iCar file, and it's on the system. Before you saw how it automatically got deleted, now it's like one file scanned, and it's still there. So, yeah, just with simple file property manipulation, as far as permissions go, you can entirely disable your EDR and your AV, right? So I imagine you're like, cool, did you guys tell Microsoft? You heard BSides talking about it. Well, of course we told Microsoft about it. So then you're like, well, what did Microsoft say about it? Surely they gave you like a $30,000 bounty or something, right? They were like, hey, you could do a lot more damage with administrator access. To that, I'm like, yeah, but what else besides disable your AV and EDR? What is more important than that? I don't know. But yeah, so they closed out both of our tickets saying, hey, that you could do more damage with that. So
very expensive products that you can just disable that easily, and it's kind of like,
yep.
Eh.
All right, and into safe mode.
Oh, yeah. Before we get to that, but it's kind of looped in with this. So we did test another EDR product that we got our hands on to do some additional stuff. And we found out even with that one, you can basically do the exact same thing. A lot of file manipulation to just take ownership, deny access to everything throughout Windows so that none of the specific services could be even executed or run. What you could also do, though, is if you are local admin on your systems, you can get the BitLocker recovery key. Oh, I'm skipping forward. Really? Okay. You don't need to be local admin to get the BitLocker recovery key from PowerShell. That's true. Okay. I think I only tried it as admin.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So yeah, you don't even need to be admin for that. Well, obviously once you get into safe mode then, as a regular user, you can then just start uninstalling a lot of the really, really important stuff like the kernel drivers, taking ownership of those and then deleting all of that stuff. And that's kind of the point of safe mode, my understanding, is that it's to boot Windows into a mode where almost all third-party applications aren't really running so that you can debug and troubleshoot things. So BitLocker, yeah, here it is. This real simple command, you can get the BitLocker recovery key, which, as people have stated, you can do this as a low-level user, so even worse than what we anticipated. Once you have that, obviously you can go in and start disabling a bunch of stuff. Obviously in here too, in our experience, you can create new users, you can download things, well, you can't download things, but if you already have like Mimikatz on the system, you're gonna be able to run all of these things, and then once you get it back onto your corporate network, it didn't seem like all of these logs then just got dumped and a whole bunch of alerts were generated. You were able to do all of this stuff kind of blind, get back on the network, and no one would be any the wiser that you did these things. Creating new local admins, running Mimikatz, things like that. Crash Plan, anybody here familiar with that service? Yeah. So pretty popular in the backup, kind of like in the backup space to help with, obviously with ransomware. They don't make any claims that they have tamper protection by any means, but just to show, this is another really important one for ransomware. You can just very quickly and very easily run the exact same things to uninstall this specific service as well. Now, that's not that big of a deal. It still has tons and tons of backups, right? Well,
No, yeah,
okay. That doesn't really matter. If you go through the actual console that's on your system, you can navigate around and it will bring you to this admin page for your systems, all of the systems that Crash Plan has for you. And very simply, you can just click on the system you want and then set to deactivate. Everything is wiped. Every single backup that they had on your system for the past 90 days is gone now. Free to do ransomware, unless there's other protections. But for the most part, that's kind of like the big glaring hole there. Other controls.
Yeah, so there are other controls on your system, right? Besides just the EDR, all this fun stuff. So simple ones are just like Gatekeeper, right? If anybody's not familiar what Gatekeeper is, that's essentially mark of the web on Mac, right? Up here in the top right, you'll see that, hey, I'm downloading something just from a local server, since it's coming from a browser, it puts the mark of the web on it, right? When you go to like execute that thing, in this case, it's like an app inside of like a DMG file, right? Nothing malicious. And it says, no, I'm not gonna let you run that because you download it from the web. And I'm like, well, I'm the administrator, so I'm just gonna turn this off. So people in your organization, if they have local admin access, they could just disable mark of the web. And if they're doing that, then bad things could happen, because then it actually asks you, it's like, hey, you sure you wanna open this? And it actually gives you the option. And yeah, we've actually run successful campaigns with this. So you hit open, and then it'll just pretty easily run the code over there. We talked about sudo and run run as administrator access quite a bit. So there's a way you can detect, right? If somebody is running sudo that shouldn't, they're going to get reported to the administrator, right? Well, we know a way, if you just run it through the OSA script and just say, hey, with administrator privileges, it doesn't actually, if you're looking for sudo in your command line, any sort of telemetry, it's not going to show that. It'll show this, and then you get to like type in your password and everything. So this is a pretty neat little trick to like bypass anybody trying to bypass any sort of detection around that. Once again, yeah, you can erase a lot of things, right? Just, hey, if you're, inside your syslog, if you are looking at everything for, or if that's where like all your telemetry are going, you could just delete it, right? And then this is also another thing that we kind of touched on, right? You can change, well, does anybody know what immutable is? Somebody shout it out. What's immutable? Somebody say it.
You can't cover something up. There's always a record of what happened in the past.
That's right. There's always a record, and then you can't change it, right? Like, so if you set something to immutable, it means it can't be changed anymore, right? So, like, even if you're the root user, you have to unset an immutable flag on something to be able to touch it again, right? So as a bad guy, if you want to go in and then like backdoor or mess with any of these different sensitive files right here, you change it and you set the immutable flag on it. Even if there's something that's supposed to come up and clean afterwards, it won't actually work because you set the immutable flag on it. So that's another neat trick. And what would a talk be without AI?
Oh, yeah. Everything has to have AI, right? Including this talk. So AI gets looped into everything these days, right? And one of the things that we have seen out in the industry is that they're starting to hook AI for like role permissions or granting roles into something like Teams. And maybe you guys have an internal, AI bot that handles a lot of that kind of stuff. Well, very simply, you might be able to just ask it to give you local admin permissions on your system. And this might bypass all of the, there might be an approval process for you to normally get that. This might just give it to you, and it might just give it to you at the longest length of time that you're approved for a specific admin. Going into some persistent local admin stuff, this is probably going to be stuff you guys all know, but say you're granted, you have that real brief window of local admin. Well, how do you get that to be a little bit more persistent, continuing to tamper with the system? Well, there's always that built-in local administrator account. Just go ahead and change the password for that specifically. And obviously, this might be controlled by something like LAPS or local administrator policy password solution. Yeah, password solution. And by default, this actually sets that password for that user for 30 days. So you could set this for yourself, and you might be able to have a semi-persistent local admin for 30 days. And these are things that you need to be aware of in your environment, because there might be people doing this to try to circumvent some of these approval processes. Now, what you can do to make it permanent is just go ahead and uninstall LAPS, but you have to do this after you've set the password. Otherwise, no one's going to be able to get into it whatsoever, unless they have much, much higher permissions. So once you did this, now you control this account. Any sort of like help desk or desktop support that tries to get into your system to do something administratively, they're not going to be able to use that account whatsoever, and they'll be locked out. Obviously you can create your own local admin as well. But in our experience, just throughout all of the years, it seems like there's always some sort of script that will strip that away at some point.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason that we're talking about this because we do need to allow people to do some sort of administrative actions like on their systems, right? And there's a lot of like just-in-time access that you do give users temporarily. Well, this is more of like, hey, if you give them temporary access, so help desk doesn't need to help them install Adobe, then they could do it themselves, kind of thing, right? Well, what can they do to like bypass that, right? And then actually like maintain that access. Even if you put a banner up there that says, "Thou shalt not, circumvent security controls," they don't really have to listen. So you can enable the root account, right? That's a pretty easy one, a neat trick. I don't know if anybody knows about it, but the root account on Mac isn't enabled by default, but if you're root, or if you have sudo access, you could just enable the root account and then use that. And if you don't have anything checking to make sure the root account isn't enabled, it could persist. And here's a list of different things that you could do, right, to create like a stealth admin on a system. This is a script that I ran, and the neat parts about this are, I guess, like on the third, fourth line where it says unique ID 509, primary group of 80, et cetera, right? You see that like it's not like actually setting anything to the administrators group itself. So in Linux, Mac world, you can like assign different IDs like to the group IDs directly to the user itself without putting it in those groups. So if you're doing something like, hey, check for all admins in the group, you're not checking for everybody in group 80 or group 10, the wheel group, right, that do have admin access. You're just checking for admins, right? So yeah, this goes through, creates a shell, does eventually like add it. And then this script right here is just exemplifying exactly what I was talking about, right? So not the cleanest looking script, but at the top you'll say, hey, this is going through and doing a loop, and it's looking through all of the users, and then it's getting their primary group ID, right? Well, we see that, hey, our stealth admin user is assigned to group 80, but next, if we look at all of the administrators in there, we'll see that our administrator is not in there, right? So just be careful what you're checking. You need to actually be checking the group ID membership itself, not just like relying on, hey, who's in the domain admin group sort of thing, right? Another thing, hey, users, they could just add themselves, right? If they have admin access, what's stopping them from 4 or 5 different ways, especially with AI assistants out there to tell them how to like bypass the security controls, right? How can they just add themselves? They could just add themselves to these, and then just set the immutable flags. So that brings me kind of like to our users, right? I wanted to quickly like talk about user stories. Don't have like any like Jira flashbacks or anything. Not those type of user stories. I'm talking about the user stories that like you hear from the trenches, right? So as like security professionals, we look at a lot of this stuff, right? And if I asked you, I was like, hey, like go to the MITRE framework and show me what you're talking about, right? most of you would probably come up here. Impaired defenses. That's like what almost everything that we're doing, right? If you go to like TT or MITRE, this is what most of you would come up with, like from a technical point of view, right? Well, what do the users actually like see, or like what do they hear, right? They hear no, right? Like that's what they hear from you. They hear, no, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. This isn't like a preachy thing about like, hey, allow users to do whatever, because obviously we don't want to allow the users to do whatever, but we need to like give them a reason why you can't do that thing, or at least prevent them from being able to do it in general, right? And I'll just quickly run through some stories here. This is, I don't know if any whippersnappers, this is Stack Overflow. Like we used to use this before AI assistance, and this is actually what would, give us like all the code for us to copy, right? This is what started a lot of this. Like basically contract worker went in there, was like, hey, how can I disable Zscaler? It's just out there for everyone to see, right? So you can just disable it. What about like talking to the users themselves, right? Well, we've had this instance of people saying, hey, I'm not in the sudoers file anymore, even though I put myself there. Wait a minute, why did you put yourself in there, right? So users will do crazy and weird things, right? Like, hey, I wanted to, I forgot what this one is for, but yeah, like, oh, this is the email saying, hey, why did you do this, right? Hey, I'm just vibing, and then I just want to disable some UAC because, hey, that's security control. I don't really care for that. It makes my job hard. So let's disable UAC, right? Actual things that have happened. We've seen these things. So enough about user stories. More about like the disclosure. So we did actually report all of this to Zscaler, but it took a little bit of relationship management to actually be able to like get some of this stuff to go through, because last November is whenever we reported some of this stuff, and it was kind of like crickets. But relationship management, we actually got some stuff moving, and they released patches or have fixes for 14 of the 17 issues. So I guess if you want to go like hunt and see which 3 still work, have at it. These are the configurations. What if you ask them and say, hey, I'm having this issue, these are the things they are going to tell you to do. So hey, I made it easy for you. If you want to take a picture and run with that. Oh, no, I'm sorry, no pictures, what she said. Yeah, what she said. Mental picture, right? And Microsoft, yeah, hey, we reported it, no impact there. And then with that, Blake, you want to do the recap?
Not prepared for that. Let's see, recap. Probably not, because I haven't read it.
Oh, okay. It says, can you uninstall the thing? Yes, this is just another sheet or another slide that if anybody, basically this explains all of kind of the ideas, a lot of the bypasses, and how to take advantage of them. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It's usually a picture slide, but no pictures. And with that, any questions?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. All right. Yeah.
For the Windows Defender example, when you're running your tests, do you guys have any security protection?
What was it?
If we had tamper.
Yeah, supposedly we had everything set to like the maximum protections according to all of their standards, but yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so can you talk a little bit more about the illusion, like what kind of promises are the defenders making? And then also, like, do you think this, with admin rights, stuff like this is always going to be possible, true or false?
Yes, to an extent, right? So, like, yeah, the illusion part, like I spoke about in the beginning, it's that, hey, we wanted to like challenge like the tamper-proof, right? We have like tamper-proof enabled on all of this stuff, right? But even with admin or low-level user access, there is still some way to like get around it, right? So, really wanting to like challenge that, since that's kind of like a buzzwordy thing right now. And then, yeah, we had tamper-proof, everything installed. Any other questions over it?
Did you get any bounty money for the disclosures?
Any bounty money? No, we're actually trying to get like CVEs for some of the stuff as well, since there is a precedent for them actually issuing, but they haven't, so we're here talking about it. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yes.
Do you have any plans to maybe do what Microsoft suggested, using admin privileges to, do worse on the disabling defender? Do you have any plans?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, at some point, I would say. Yeah, we need to dig into that a little bit more. Let's see what
Yeah,
they
well-
think is actually is bad.
I'd be curious.
Yeah.
Slides. Yeah, I mean, I guess we can put them up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we should be able to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you very much, everybody.
If you look at my GitHub, I'll post them up there. Caleb Sargent GitHub, and I'll put them up there.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
All right, thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. Yeah.